what is required. If most people know what's required when they read your code, there'll be more predictability and less frustration from a property owner, because then they'll know what they should be doing to get through the process. We also heard make it simpler, easier to understand. A theme that we heard is make it easier to do the right thing. So that is why, I mean, for one example, we're going to include tables rather than long written descriptions, and I'll explain what that is. An example within here, it's easier for people to look at what zoning district they are, for example, and see what's required on a table than where in the code do I look for it. Same thing with the process, or what are they applying for? What kind of development would they like to accomplish? Another chart that explains here are all the things that you need to do, and here are the subsections of the code that you need to look for. So that will make it a lot easier. Standardize the code structure. There are things that are not the same organization throughout the articles. Definitely to accomplish, again, this main goal of making the code more user-friendly is to reorganize the code. There are few sections that are obsolete or not necessary. And for example, your Article 2 says policies, those could be either removed or within other sections. That's just one small example. We just want it to be more intuitive, more streamlined, as organized as possible, as organized as a zoning code can be. That's what our goal is. And there's a lot of room for improvement in the current code, as you can imagine. Another way to make it more user-friendly. Yes.
As we get to the table, are we going to have like you say, here's the section that you need to go to, and are we actually going to have reference pointers in that, say, block to the section of code they need to go to? I notice right now we just have I'm jumping ahead, sorry, but there's P's and S's, but I didn't know if we would have code section, whatever.
Yes, that's a good question. So what we did is the table that we included is if a very basic table were even to be made in the current code, because there's absolutely no tables. There's just what each district permits and doesn't permit. But the code that we'll be drafting and helping with, yes, we'll have more information. It'll say specific standards that are to that use, and then a reference point to that code subsection.
Okay.
Which I did mention it here, so when I see it, I'll point it out to you, and then for you so you could visualize that, So this relocates submittal requirements, fees, and policies. There are some locations you do have a schedule fee in your town, but there are some locations in your land use code that you still have this requires $50. We always recommend removing that, referring to a fee schedule that's changed by resolution, which is easier. The same thing with submittal requirements. For example, if you want to apply for any particular type of development, it'll say, in the current code, it says, for example, subdivision, it has maybe 15 things that you're submitting. That could be referred somewhere else, because those are just these kind of staff administrative necessities that could be pulled out, make the code shorter and more streamlined. So that's important. And references to staff, deadlines for staff that maybe sometimes cannot be met in the future. You never know, resources are limited. I always recommend never to put an obligation on the town that isn't necessary, because it could be onerous on the staff. There's some things that are a very short time frame. Those type of things are not necessary to be in a code. Again, they could be changed administratively or through a resolution. So here's where we talk about tables. These are just a few examples of tables that we recommend. Definitely a use table where, we'll say what's prohibited, permitted, and conditional use, along with other information that I'll explain. I do explain later. I remember writing it. The dimensional standards table is another table which we'll show a very basic example of each zoning district, what setbacks, what building height, minimum lot area. That way, again, the person just looks instead of having to find out. Right now, the way it's written is not like most other codes. You have to look at the district and then underneath it, it has all the requirements. Summary tables, but specifically decision-making, appeal bodies, and most importantly, review procedures and noticing requirements. So any type of application that someone is going for, it'll all be in one table, and it'll say, this one goes to planning commission, city council, board of trustees, and this is the notices that you need. And it'll probably have check block, checks. Then this, and then you say, okay, well, I want to do a rezone. Then you see what you need, and then it'll have the references to the code sections. So it'll just be, again, more intuitive, more streamlined. So this is the what you were referring to, just P's and S's. What the purpose of this is just to show what is in the code so far in terms of the uses that are mentioned. It's good to mention more, at least general uses, and you do identify items in your comp plan that uses that want to be at least mentioned, so people know if it's not permitted, or if it's not here, then it's not permitted if you don't have a P. So this is like very, very basic. If we were to create, this is almost like if this was your code right now, we would expect it to look like, with just this very basic, but at least you could see what is permitted. That was the purpose of it. But that being said, there will be another column where we explain that'll have that that another last column that will refer you to a different subsection for certain uses. For example, if you had, let's say short-term rentals, you would have a separate, if you had very specific standards, it would have a little check mark on that column, and not a check mark, but that column would say section 1-2-3. So you would know, okay, these are my other requirements that I need. It's not just permitted, but I need to have, A, B, C, and D. So you're not flipping all through, where do I look? It's pointing you in the right direction. So, and this is an example of a dimensional standards chart. Again, most land use codes have this. So this is just an example of if your current zoning districts were to have it, each section said, like, for example, R1 5,000, this is the minimum lot area, frontage, lot width, setback. So we might add columns, but this is just an example of what it says now. So you could kind of see very basic beginning points of what a table like this would look like.
Okay, maybe a couple comments, questions.
Yeah.
That'd be appropriate now?
Yes, definitely. It's a good point.
I notice we have, you have a block for like agricultural uses. And I'm wondering if we should have that be like agricultural/livestock, in case someone were wanting to put in chicken coops, which I think would be a bad idea personally, but especially in our area with the wildlife. But we might want to think about something there where if we truly don't want that as a commission in a town, then we would might specifically say, no, you really shouldn't have that here.
Some people have horses, right?
Yeah, and then there's the other thing of horses. So we may, like say, we may want to add agriculture/livestock.
Yeah, it's helpful.
Yep.
And that's why I added some of these, because you see that it's all empty. It's not addressed in the code, but it's kind of like in other codes it is. So that's why I put those in to start that conversation. So I appreciate that insight about the livestock I'm writing down.
Yeah, and then on the dimensional standards, I've seen some other towns, and I think it was Buena Vista specifically, that had a maximum lot coverage. And I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect they did that to maybe help with stormwater. Is that why they do that, or is it just purely aesthetics?
I don't know exactly for BV, but I know that a lot of communities have maximum lot coverage for aesthetics, or just for to keep up a certain character of certain zones. I'll write that down as something that you got to consider for you to have that column, at least see maybe certain of your districts you want to have that. Another reason why they might make sure they have that is if they allow ADUs on certain properties, maybe it's okay, we will allow an ADU. For example, people do that if they want to have a mother-in-law come back to age in place, or younger people who are can't find a place to live, or if you want to rent out places. If you guys decide later on where would you like to have that, if anywhere, you're okay with that idea in theory, but you want to make sure that it's not covering up the whole lot. I've seen that discussion happen hand in hand. So that's just a few examples of why some of the towns have the maximum lot coverage.
Okay, yeah, and then I'm kind of hoping as we go through the discussion, as we go through this process, personally, I'd kind of like to see like standard things across the board, like maximum building height, 35 feet there and done. Because that way, I think it might be easier if we do have staff looking at things and trying to do things administratively for us. So.
Right, yeah, we speak about that later, like standards, standards that you all want as a town. There's so much that you can decide at this point, at this juncture, what's important for the town that staff really can review. And that would be an example, maximum building height, or there's so many things that really are not, they're not subjective if you decide on the front end. So if you decide what's important for your town, that's why we're doing this process, there's more that you can move to administrative, because they would have to follow the standards that you have created on the front end. And that saves a lot of time for people, a lot who are frustrated in the community input, that all the steps they need to take. And that's the way you still preserve your community character on the, but you're very specific as to what staff has to review for certain types of developments. Any other comments or input so far from this?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment.
Yes.
I'm looking at this particular chart and I'm thinking, I've driven around town. We drove up and down almost every street in Green Mountain Falls recently just to get a feel for what exists there. And we're not talking about development standards for future development. Mostly we're talking about is people who come to the planning commission wanting to add a deck onto their house, and they've got a 45-foot wide lot that's 12,000 square feet. And we're saying you need a 15-foot setback on both sides. And we're leaving them with a 15-foot envelope to build in. So we got to, in my mind, I'm looking at this going, how do we address existing? Because there are a lot of lots in this town that are more than 10,000 square feet that are 45, 50, 55, 60 feet wide. And we're going to tell them, well, you have to have a variance to build on your own existing lot. I'd like to see us address some of those kinds of issues in this rewrite. On Belvedere, we've had 2 homes demolitioned in the last 10, 15 years on lots that cannot be rebuilt on. We have a 2.5 acre minimum for a septic system here because there's no sewer system. So if a lot has a cesspool that collapses and they're unable to rebuild a septic system on that lot, or a home is demolished and leaves the lot unusable, I guess my point is we have more existing lots and existing infrastructure than we do potential build lots. So in our addressing these charts, how do we do that? I mean, I'm just bringing the question up. It's important that we take a look at the existing homeowners. How do we serve them best? This is an oddball community. There are lots here that are 200 feet wide and 50 feet deep. There's really strange configurations here. And it's not like you're building a new subdivision and you're telling a developer that he has to have minimum 5,000 square foot lots. We have a lot of existing stuff that needs to be addressed. So just raising the question.
No, that's a really good point. So this is your current, these are what's in the current zoning district. That doesn't mean they can't be changed. So it would be for any, whether it's new or current existing, if there's a consensus that these are too restrictive for people, then that's something that you all can tell me. This is a good chart. It's on page 8 for everyone to look at and maybe contact either I guess for Zach individually, so we don't have an open meetings thing, with your input as to some of these setbacks that seem a little too restrictive, and we can see this consensus and talk about the ones that we see that are reoccurring at another meeting. And then I can also ask to see what type of variances have been requested lately. For example, if your last 10 variances have been for side yard setback for people to build a deck on their home or something, then that's means that the code is not representative to what the community currently needs. So all those things are important, and those are very specific things that are important to bring up. So I think the best way is to, as you think about it, chew on it, get input, let us know specifically, and then we can also look at the data and bring that up again, because needs to work for you. I don't know when the exact each part of these requirements were created, but a lot of them were 1997, a long time ago. So that is really important to know.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering if it might be a good idea to have basically a meeting for the planning commission just on these tables, with whatever proposal, to look at and try to review. Because I got a feeling these are probably going to be the meat of the majority of what comes in front of either staff or planning commission. And so, yeah, I'll just put that out there, as something that we might want to consider having maybe even a special meeting just to kind of go over proposals in the tables.
Yeah, I haven't any proposals this is just your current. So yeah, for you to make proposals. Yeah, because I wouldn't, but we're going to propose that we'll go on later. The districts slightly change based on your comp plan. I think it might be more productive to start with the idea that everyone chews on it and individually messages staff, because then it could frame future conversations so we know, because I find that sometimes helps as people really chew on it, think about it, and then we can see if there's a reoccurring theme that is maybe one or two of these are really important, and then we know what's more important for the town. But yeah, definitely these are just, again, these are your restrictions for your town, especially this is very particular to what is desired in the town to be built or to be renovated on a house or added.
Just one more comment. I see kind of
Anyway.
two avenues here. We're developing a structure first, where we can put these numbers in and revise them as we deem necessary. And I really appreciate the charts and the layout, and I think this is a good procedure. And we can address this later. And once we've determined the correct columns and rows, and we've got those set, then it'll be another process to go back in and say, is this appropriate?
Yeah, I would say the good way to start again is for everyone to just kind of look at this, because it makes more sense for our next step to be like we had administrative procedures, and this is the zoning districts and the use. So we do have time. Chew on it, look at it, think about it, and first start with reaching out to staff as to like different, and we'll have appointing Zach, if that's okay, to have different specifications, because otherwise I can't think of a better way to start the process that would actually be productive. And Zach has given his email. It's zach@gmfco.us. So that's just a first step that I know will be better as everyone chews on it, because we will see, this will direct the conversation for you all. That's what we're here to do, to facilitate. This is your code, and that will be a good way to help, because I find that will be the best way to start that discussion. And again, we have time before we get to that part of the code. So it could be something that you're starting today to the next couple of months as to these specifics.
And I did put my email address there in the chat. So it's staff@gmfco.us. So.
And then Zach, I will probably ask you to collect the past 2 years of variance applications, and then we can kind of see that'll help a lot. So that was making the code more user-friendly. The next part, kind of recommendation that we're having, where we're explaining it better in this outline and report, is to update review procedures. So that's the big, I would say that's one of the largest feedback we got. And it's not surprising looking at the current code, is the current standards are difficult to not only enforce, but to comply with. Parts of the approval process are all over. That's why later you'll see where we outline the new articles. It'll all be in one place. Again, make the approval process more predictable, less confusing, objective factors. People, what should have a public hearing, what can, again, go administratively. That's not ceding public or community influence or power to the staff. It's directing staff, and again, on the front end, and we're very specific in this code so that staff has the ability to say, this is what's important to the town. I'll have a checklist, so certain applications can go through that. Certain still need to go through the public process, but certain ones that you have and you've identified that go through the public process likely don't need to, because you're all going to agree, okay, that one topic we agree, as long as A, B, and C are complied with, we don't need to look at it, because we already said that those are what needs to happen before people move forward. So again, this will be a table, but for each review procedure, we'll also have a better explanation all in one place. Thresholds for the type of review, what are the common review procedures, steps, and the objective criteria. And that's very important, because that's fair to the property owner, and it also guides you, or when you make a decision for certain applications, for certain approvals, what are the few criteria that you have to look at so that that person has a fair chance in front of you. And we've heard that vague criteria is open. Well, vague criteria is open to subjective interpretation. That's just the fact. But then we've heard that creates uncertainty for applicants, delays due to resubmittals, and inconsistent decisions, which people get frustrated with. So another way for the review procedure, to update the review procedure, is to establish a site plan review procedure. So right now we don't have that. Other codes have that, and I think that would be helpful for again, these goals that we've heard from you all and from the community and from the survey, is that more predictable procedures. One section will have, this is the site plan review procedure. Does this project comply with certain requirements, like parking, landscape? That's just an example that something could be looked at, and in the most case reviewed by staff. So this, again, going back to the chairman's point, is certain things will have the uses permitted by right, and then we can distinguish whether those are reviewed administratively or through the public hearing process. So just an example is, it could be a minor site plan review or a major site plan review. Maybe the threshold is 15 residential units, 20,000 square feet. That might be too large for your town. You will pick the threshold that, with your input, obviously, as to what would go administratively and what would go for a public hearing. So that was much shorter than the first one, but it's shorter in terms of what I'm explaining in the report, but this is a larger part of the code, or a very important, crucial part is this section, which will be our first installment, is the review administrative procedures, to start with that. So any initial or any other input before I go to the next section? That's the least fun part for most people. Probably the most exciting part for a lawyer. So now we're getting into more town specific.
Yeah, Nina, that last section, that's where we could conceivably have, if we wanted, almost everything be administrative, as long as it fit within certain boundaries.
Yes, but it will go over anything that's approved, but yes, exactly. Oh, you mean the very last part, the site plan? Yes,
Yeah.
It could be all done administratively or most done administratively, as long, and you will on the front end decide those very specifics, and we'll give examples so you could see.
Okay.
We'll draft something and see how you, based on what you're saying, and then see how everyone feels with that. It's probably likely going to be like, oh, that follows most of what we say, but this tweak will more apply to Green Mountain Falls, and that's what. It's a small town, and that was one of the biggest input, even if it was said in a different way, was that there's too many steps and processes, and it doesn't make sense if it could be streamlined. And again, the requirements are what you're going to put in the code, but most of those requirements can be looked at by a staff member who is experienced in that, what they're looking for, versus you as a planning commission making sure that the site plan has 4 parking spaces, versus you as a planning commission deciding whether a variance is warranted. That is something that's more appropriate for you. In a land use code rewrite, you hope to have less variances, but obviously it's not possible to have none, especially in with the topography and the makeup of remount falls. But yeah.
Another question, have you seen instances where, say if something is done administratively with staff, that if staff feels the need, they can reach out to, say, members of public, members of other committees or whatever to help assist them?
Along those lines. So I actually had a sentence in there that I removed, and now I'll add back to my idea, is that what it's called is that it's certain types, there are certain situations where the staff can decide to pull it and put it on the public meeting, not speak to the public, like not in a public meeting, but that they pull those things, that application, and there'll be reasons why they're able to do that, and then put on the planning commission agenda. So basically what you're saying, that's a recommendation I have seen, that most, you could say actually all of this is all of this grouping is administrative, except if the staff elevates it to planning commission based on these reasons, community interest or that kind of thing. It needs to be very carefully, that part needs to be very carefully picked, because you don't want that people pick and choose what can be just pushed through administrative and what can go to the public hearing. But I've seen that work in an effective manner in some newer codes.
Okay, yeah, I was just curious, because if we get to a point where, say, everything's coming into a staff member and they're just either unfamiliar, uncertain, or whatever, I didn't know if there was a way to engage planning commission at that point.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up. I'm writing it down. Like I'm actually writing like the part I heard to recommend. So I'm writing that down. So yes, there is, and you'll see how I recommend drafting it. But it's exactly the point that you're making, is that in that way it's kind of accomplishing everything and also addressing the valid concerns. Like sometimes people are so nervous to have everything administrative because of those small situations. But if it says these are the times where it's administratively approved, but there can be a referral from staff to the planning commission, then that is a way to address it all. And I have seen it effectively done.
Nina,
Yeah.
we're kind of circling my question as well, and to reference that Gregory had mentioned about, this is just, we have so many unusual properties and older properties and just weird situations. In addition to staff being able to refer it, let's say staff doesn't maybe even follow the rules properly from the homeowner's point of view, or the homeowner feels like they have a valid reason for a variance. Are they able, is there a review process where they can ask for this? And do we have to have rules about how they're able to do that or not able to do that? And
Yeah, so
including
there's definitely certain applications that will always have to go to planning commission. So when we say administratively, that's maybe a large chunk, but there's still ones that will always have to go. Then yes, there'll have to be an appeal process. And then the variance, we have to have a section for a variance, that if a homeowner can't comply with those dimensional standards, or usually your variances relate to the dimensional standards versus the use, that they then have to have the right to go for a variance, and that would go in front of you. I believe you guys act as the board of adjustment. So yes, to your question, there has to be an appeal process for certain situations, and then definitely we couldn't take away a variance procedure. You have one now, but we're going to make it, clean it up a little bit, but you definitely have to have, you definitely will still have that variance section so that that homeowner will still have the ability. And variances are very appropriate in a lot of your situations that apply to Green Mountain Falls. I represented Idaho Springs, which has similar issues in terms of the topography and the setbacks. You know, if most of the person's property is a slope of, I'm doing this as if it's 90 degrees, but you know, I mean, a slope where they can't build, obviously that's the reason why variances exist. So a land use code has to have a section for that as well. And we'll make it easier to in the charts that we'll be creating, it will be easier to show, and I'll talk about that later in this, it'll be easier to show what the appeal process is. So if it's administrative, does it go here? If it's planning commission, it'll be what the person's applying for, and then either a letter or a check mark as to what the appeal process is. So the next recommendation, or if I group into larger things that we'll be doing with this zoning code rewrite, is to review and update the zoning districts. Your comprehensive plan is very recent, and it was very clear as to future land use plans. It's very helpful. A lot of times when you're rewriting land use code, it's, oh, that'll be something we recommend you do. You've already, well, through the comprehensive plan, recommended these uses, and these are good ideas for amending the zoning districts. It's more clear to say single and two-family residential versus all those different residential zones that you have. That makes it clear, which is what people asked for. You want to be clear on the downtown village business, and that's another homework assignment in addition to looking at the dimensional standards, is seeing if you and your community still agree with that future. Generally, you know, we're not going to get into very specifics about the rezoning, but that future land use map, it's figure 19 in your comprehensive plan, which is, I believe, page 63. And that's a good visual to explain the recommendations of the comprehensive plan as it relates to these zone districts. And the overlay zone, you have this hillside overlay zone that is almost the entire town limits. That's not what an overlay zone is. I understand that it was, you know, the purposes for it. So definitely we recommend not to have a hillside overlay zone. What we do is take the important parts of that section and see where that belongs in your code for those standards. But an overlay zone is something that's very specific for design criteria and specific standards for a few blocks or a small part of a zone district. So a good example, and this comes out of input and your comprehensive plan, overlay zones that I've drafted or helped people with are historic preservation and downtown commercial core. So even if you had going back to the zone district, you had your downtown village, maybe there's a part of that or all of it that would be your downtown commercial core, where additional regulations in addition to the zone district that you want for your town are imposed. So in other communities, the downtown commercial core overlay district, a lot of them say, well, there's no housing on the first level because that's where the shops should go. That's just one example. So see, it's a very particular restriction that only applies to what the community has wanted for, you know, I'm saying a few blocks, but I think you understand what I'm saying, a neighborhood or a very small section. Another is a historic preservation. I've drafted a lot of code sections about that can help the town whenever they want to go for their certifications with the state and the federal governments to get certain, because this is identified as something that you have, your town has wanted. In addition, that so it kind of sets it up and that could be also your overlay district, that these parts are considered that they need, you know, any certain renovations need to go through certain processes. So that's an example of an overlay zone versus your hillside overlay zone. Not to say that those regulations are meaningless, they should be put elsewhere than what is done. But I understand what was done was to, you know, adapt, but now that we're redoing it, let's do it right. So before we go to use regulations is the next section. Anything on the zoning districts?
Well, I was curious if there's if you've known of any advantages for getting like grants based upon, say, historic preservation
Yes.
down commercial core.
Yes, definitely the historic preservation and well, both. The historic preservation, the section I'm putting this as a separate article, just to be clear, in the land use code, and it's gonna seem like, well, there's all these different sections. Why? And that's because that's what the state and the federal government needs to see. And you do get grant money from becoming a certified local government, is what they call it. And I can help the town staff with resources for the future that they can go apply for that. And that's how you get grant money for. There's so many different reasons why there's money out there, but one example is, facade improvements, or all my cities go, look into those, and they get, again, facade improvements, and they give it to the businesses. There's so many different types of grants, little bicycle stands that you can get because that's what probably a different type of historic preservation. There's a lot of money to be had if you follow the steps, which are not too onerous, but then at least your land use code will be set up to take those steps. So the next recommendation is revise the use standards. So remember, thinking back to the use table. That was, again, very basic. If we were to create one right now, based on your current code, we think that it could be streamlined. First of all, contain broad and simple use categories, additional subcategories. And this is the part I was looking for when Chair Dixon was talking, and I was wondering, where did it go? See where I say in the second paragraph, this table can include an additional column entitled use specific standards. So to answer your question an hour later, this is how I envision it: is the uses permitted, not permitted, so specialty use permit, and then that last column, some of those uses will have code subsections. And for example, I've seen it in ADUs, street patios. Well, that's for a temporary use, but there's so many different, when you want to have specific standards that, yes, this use is permitted, but, so a P doesn't just explain it, but there's these specific standards that it needs to fall under. So that last column will say 16-2-180. And that way the person will know, okay, yes, I could do this, but let me just look for the standards there. So again, it streamlines it. They know they got to go there, but at least it's right there for them. So that's that. That's very short explanation, but that's very important part of the code. It's just, it's kind of straightforward explanation. So the next, second to last recommendation, then we'll show you the outline of how we recommend to actually write out the code, is these development standards. So this is based on the comprehensive plan and the community input. What we've heard that type of standards you may want for either new, I could see it for you wanting it for new development, and maybe particular districts or overlays. So, for one example, we just spoke about historic, what are the design standards possibly in that overlay? So that would be that last one, exterior facade. So protecting historic areas, also the first one. More walkable access, improved connectivity of street and trails. For example, a new residential subdivision or different type of application that is residential, they'll have to be required to make sure they connect to the trails. That's an example of a development standard that it seems like the town wants from, again, all these, the comp plan input. Maybe certain projects that you want, you're going to consider relaxed standards, certain landscaping standards, lighting, parking. But again, these are in particular circumstances. It's not to be onerous. It's to say, in these overlay districts or in this new development, this is what we want to see. So this is what you'll think about and what we're taking into consideration. Design standards, where should we be sensitive to natural areas as we're building? Again, pedestrian access, where can we insert that importance of road connectivity? You got to connect to the trails. You have to have either open space dedication or a fee in lieu that goes to a park or a bicycle lane or whatever it may be. Not bicycle lane, but you know, more ability for the trail or whatever the case may be. consistency with technical standards. So that example would be street, sidewalk, trees, utilities. And again, that would refer back to either that an engineer approves or that you do have an engineer standards that are created. That would be, again, an example of development standards to be more specific for what you want to see new development usually in your town. And then the last thing is just not to forget, I mean, obviously everything we do is community specific, but there were particular goals that we saw in the comp plan that can be really addressed the land use code. And it refers back to the way we look at all these sections, but just a reminder, using the code to make it more walkable, bikeable. There was wanted to attract commercial growth. So that goes back to those overlays, not just for grants, but how do you want to ensure that there's, you know, 1 or 2 blocks that, again, no residential on the main floor, that way there's small businesses coming in, different types of incentives, you know, certain types of commercial development. Well, should that area have an overlay? Historic scenic downtown, we spoke about how we can do that. And then the comp plan called for diverse housing types. So before we go into kind of the nitty gritty, but this might, it's not nitty gritty, but it's more explaining how the sections will change. The substance we have explained above. Is there, I want to make sure any other questions at that point.
Nina, you had mentioned earlier that we're not dealing with fire mitigation right now, or are we somewhat dealing with fire mitigation? Some of the examples that you gave were around landscaping and that sort of thing. So are we dealing with that now with this rewrite, or is it pushed off?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked. In any way that we can in a land use code, we will, because that's important to your town. So for example, what you had just said, and also in the design standards for new development, I mentioned that. So anywhere that we can include that where it makes sense for a land use code, we're not going to ignore that. It's just, I know that there's larger technical specifications, and I know you guys have recently spoken about the wildfire specific codes. That's more the technical building codes. And even though building codes is the chapter 18, that's more technical, that how can that be addressed better by either the building division that you're in or other types of amendments. But yeah, anytime that it makes sense in all of these different standards, of course, we're not going to ignore it. So that's really important to the community.
Yeah, to further along that question, I've actually looked up some of the wildland urban interface items, and they have some items that are fairly easy house hardening. And then they have some items that are basically trying to clear areas around the property. And some of those look like they could be fairly straightforward, just imported. And I'm kind of curious if there's opportunity maybe to do that, you know, where something already exists and it's fairly straightforward. Can we just import it? For example, they recommend having screens over your vents on the, you know, for your attic vents. You know, that's fairly straightforward. They also call out, they do get into some technical where they actually call out some, I think, certain standards for exterior materials. But even that it looks like it's been predefined. And I didn't know if those types of things that we could easily maybe import in and made sense, if those were maybe targets of opportunity here.
Yeah, like I said, anything that we can include, we're going to try to do that. As the hyper technical, I'm going to have, I spoke with Zach and Julia, the Pikes Peak Regional Building Department. I'm going to see if either someone from there or someone else that I know that has very technical experience can come and help us and speak to what is in those international codes that either need to be adopted or what is already there, or how are they addressing those issues, so that we're not conflicting or contradicting or duplicating. So I've already started working on through just the networking that I've built up, I know that their attorney and also representing Woodland Park, I know some people that we're going to have a better direction for all of us as to what updates have they already maybe done that we don't know about that are in the building codes and that Pikes Peak Regional Building Code that we adopt, or what is recommended that they amend for that would apply to Green Mountain Falls that we adopt, and what can be adopted in our code that doesn't conflict or is not the hyper technical building codes that are adopted and amended. So we're definitely not ignoring that, and already started working on that more on those parts.
Yeah, I know some of the, well, like where they say to trim the brush back, some of that stuff that's actually in wildland urban interface, we just physically can't do here in town because of the lot sizes. And so, yeah, those are the things that I was kind of hoping we could maybe kind of touch on, things that actually do make sense. It'd be nice to be able to maybe, if they make sense, just go ahead and import them.
Yes, and a lot of those, again, would be in the building, which is chapter 18, that will have a better either explanation as to what is in those building codes or what can we ask to be amended by someone who is more technical in that building division. But again, that applies to this region, that they're know about those issues. So that's why I'm going to see when would be a good time, but I think it would be good to have an informational that person come in and help us all, because then we'll really have that'll better explain, because that's not my technical expertise, but also for us to know what's being done, what can be done, and then yes, what do I already know that could be done in the land use code, and what can they possibly give us examples of to do in the land use code. So this is the current versus the proposed. This might be the least interesting. It's not substantive, it's just to kind of show you. This is all your, chapter 16 is the bulk of this land use code, what we're gonna be making those changes to. I do recommend to move 15 into 16 because it's just annexation. That's usually where it is, even though it wasn't in the scope of this. And then the subdivision to move to 16, because when you move subdivision to 16, then you can have all the administration and procedures in the same spot, Article 7, but that first installment that we're gonna do. Because an average person, if they're doing something to the land, it makes more sense to have a zoning and land use development code, charts where to go, and then descriptions. So that's probably the biggest change. If you see chapter 17 is moving, and 15. And then again, the policies in the current, those are either outdated or can be addressed somewhere else. We recommend to have articles in numbers. People don't really use Roman numerals again, but I will work with the town attorney to see how they're numbering their municipal code, and that might change. So we want to make a consistent numbering, and he's already reached out to me, and we'll make sure of that. But general provisions, well, I'll break it down later, not later in a minute. But zoning districts, use regulations, design standards, subdivision, historic preservation, administrative procedures, and then the definitions, but we'll break it down. And then 18 is similar, again, Pikes Peak Regional Building Code, make sure it's updated, fire code. I think it's a good idea to have the septic health regulations, but it will just refer to your county or the counties that have those regulations, at least mention it. It didn't make sense these current Article 3 and 4, 18 don't make sense where they are. So they'll either be deleted or the relevant parts moved back up to 16, the relevant ideas. So this breaks it down. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because it's just like going through numbers, but I will explain kind of the theory behind it and how it relates back to those recommendations. So again, the driving force for this was the recommendations, which were our experience plus the community input, making the code more user-friendly, just to recap, amending the zoning districts, the use regulations, updating review procedures, development standards, and your community-specific goals. That's the driving force for all this. I just wanted to recap. So general provisions, that's like an amorphous term. What does that mean? This is just going to start out, that this will take your current Article 1 and then your other Article 1 that's after your article, for some reason, your first and your last article. And then also, so it'll explain transition. We also recommending removing nonconformities where it is and putting in this first section. Because if you're starting with a new land use code, it's important to know where do you fit if you're already existing, and where does that fit from the prior regulations. that's just there's probably different logical, intuitive ways, but that is one logical, intuitive way that we recommend to start the code with. Then it'll just say zoning districts. This will be dimensional standards. It won't be the use regulations. That'll be the next section as we see. But it establishing, explaining districts. And then again, average person, like let's break it down to subsections. I know it's a residential district. I know it's like people see it that way: residential, mixed use, non-residential, plan development, overlay. So that's just a recommended way for your sections. And then it's 16.2.10. Again, I am going to read the town attorney, see the rest of the code, but it's better I think it's better to have, because then you have chapter, article, and then a section. But that might be just, I'm very, very organized in my mind. It's probably not necessary for the average person either, but then use regulations. So a lot of times these are together. We think it makes more sense to separate, explain the zoning district and your dimensional standards, and now talk about uses. So you'll have your table of allowed uses, those specific standards. That's that last column that we spoke about. And that use table will refer to that, which will be right after the table, which will be helpful. Accessory uses, temporary uses, and then a planned development district, which that is, I think, a typo. Strike that. That is the one mistake I didn't catch. So this one, that's just a mistake. That's in the article above. We'll strike that. Then development and design standards all together. So this is your current flood damage protection. Look at it and move it. Signs and fences. It's in their own article. That doesn't really make sense. We've heard that, a little onerous sometimes the process that needs to go through. Again, you still should have your standards that you want to have in your town, but streamline that. And that makes sense. That is a design standard, how high a fence is, what it looks like. And the signs will be updated to comply with not really new law, but from about 5 years ago, as to a certain Supreme Court decision that your code currently doesn't comply with, but it will once I rewrite it. And then these are like very specific technical, grading and drainage. That's probably going to refer, the specifics. It's going to refer to a manual like we spoke about earlier. Access and connectivity. We spoke about the importance that your community wants to have that for design standards. When would that apply? That'll all be there. So all in one spot. Subdivision, taking it from your current chapter 17. Some of your chapter 17 will be in this article. Some of it, again, will be broken down, right? Because it's a review procedure, will be in the review procedure section. So this is how we recommend breaking that out. Historic preservation, again, this is the part where I said it's going to look very specific, but this is purposeful to take it or leave it as a town. But if you want to, it sounds like that you want to have the steps in place. And that's one thing that we promised when we applied, that we have this experience that you could apply for the certain certifications as a town or as a district. And then once you are, these are the standards that the state needs to see. And so it's all laid out there for you.
Question on historic. Have you worked with anyone that's found them to be, say, for example, too onerous?
Yeah. Yes, it depends on yes. And what you do is, if it is still important for the town to even have, you make your overlay very small to where the blocks that there's buy-in from the property and there's buy-in from the town. But yes, I've had, this is the most, I don't want to say restrictive, but to your point, sections of a code that I've written. Others have had more broad language, but then it doesn't help them for keeping landmarks. So if you want to have landmarks or historic standards, you have this, but you have it only applied to your overlay, which is only the section that, if this is the way you still want to go, that you want to apply that to. So that could be, 3 blocks, 2 blocks. It could be a very small section that, again, there's buy-in from those owners because they understand that it's valuable to their property as well. And then you don't have those standards on where it doesn't make sense. And that's why overlay districts are really important, because it's not a whole zoning district that you want these restrictions.
Okay.
Administration and procedures. That's what we spoke about and what we'll mostly see in our first iteration. And you'll see that table, the procedures. This is not the sexiest part to look to see, but it's actually what the input has called for the most, outside of the specific, obviously, to the specific needs of the community. But the overarching theme was the need for make it more user-friendly, make things streamlined, easy to enforce, easy to comply with. So this will be, if you're an organized, hyper anal person like me, you'll get really excited. And then if not, you'll just know that this, oh yeah, this seems logical. This is what people are asking for, in that part of the theme that we've heard. So, and then here's to answer on the previous question, flexibility and relief procedures. See, it's right there. So you have your review procedures, you have how to go about it. And then right in that same article, how is there flexibility and relief, which would include variance. And then review and decision-making body, to that same question from before, that'll explain what the appeal rights are. So and there'll be a table there too. And then a lot of zoning codes have definitions at the beginning. More codes are moving to the end. That makes it better, again, to read, more user-friendly, because if you're looking for definition, you're going to find it, but it doesn't clutter the beginning when you start reading it. So we recommend at the end to have the definitions, and then to further, instead of just definitions, first use categories and types, because that's typically what people are looking for when they look at for definitions, and then all the other terms defined. And then again, on July 13th is when we're going to do that first, recommend that first installment, which would include Articles 1. So we'll go back just to see it. Articles 1, general provisions, 7, which will be a main part. Again, that important, but maybe not exciting part, but very, very important and asked for. And then definitions that apply to that installment. As we go in the 3 installments, the definitions, we'll add the definitions for that section to make more sense. So that first installment will include helpful tables, which was called for, the recommendations to make it more user-friendly, to update review procedures, and to take into account community goals. So we just have beyond the land use code. It's kind of a refresher or reminder of what it includes and what doesn't include. So once we create the zoning districts, mapping will be the next step for the staff. Future land use map is, you already have one in the comp plan, but do you want to adopt it and connect it with your zoning district and your official zoning map? Development application, other fees. Remember, we're removing things from the code. Then that means you'll look at your fee schedule. So the board of trustees are the ones who ultimately adopt it, but see what makes sense. And business licensing, you have a little bit provisions of business licensing, also allows for the future. Right now you have mention of short-term rentals, restaurants, mobile food vendors. We'll have cross-reference sections. So for example, when we spoke about different uses, short-term rentals, and then also, C section, chapter 6, yada, yada. It's a cross-reference. But business licensing is a separate administrative role. We'll make sure it links make sense, but that's just if we want to enhance it, that's a different process. So 20 pages. I'm sorry until I talk fast, so please let me know if you have any questions or input. And then I think it's important to reiterate that Zach put his email address for the very specific ones to your district and community. I think it would be a good idea, like we spoke about, to start emailing, reaching out, having people do the same for dimensional standards for your districts, for maybe uses, and any other ideas, but that's the very specific that I would honestly be either using this chart or pulling from a hat. I wouldn't know a lot of things I could tell from the input, but those very specifics. And I am going to look at the variances too, see what variances have been requested. That'll help guide me as well. But I guess it's a homework assignment. But any questions or input, further input? Is July 13th a good time to have that first? Okay.
Yeah, I'd say that's a good target. Okay, so we need to, it sounds like I'm not hearing any comments or additional questions from the commissioners. So again, let's go over what I would think, what I've captured a couple actions.
Good.
So, and these are 2 for the plan. I captured 2 for the planning commission and 1 for Zach. First one is Commissioner's message Zach with the ideas for the tables.
And
Correct?
dimensional standards for the district. And that'll guide us for how to facilitate further conversations.
Okay, and how soon are you needing that?
I think it should be as people think about this. If July 13th is the administration and procedures part, the zone district is after that. So although after July 13th, I would like to start drafting the other part. Now, those type of things can be easily inserted, but I would say that gives like over the next 2 months, think about it, digest it. That would help over the next 2 months.
Okay.
If Zach, how soon, Zach, do you think you can have the variance information for the past 2 months or 2 years rather? How soon do you think you can have that maybe disseminated to us? Because I think that'll help us as we're sort of thinking about everything to sort of see all that.
And
I
Zach,
honestly don't
think-
know how long that would take, but I will make that my priority. So
And I'll work with Zach because I think we don't need to know like names. I think it would just be like district, what they were requesting, and the relief. But I can work on that with you to how to, we can make, you may just make like a table or an outline very, very directly. I would say district, maybe size of the property, what they were asking for, what relief. And again, if I don't know that we had 15 in the past year of a certain thing, a side yard setback in a certain zone or because of certain slopes, we know that definitely our new land use code needs to address that.
Hey, this is Gregory. I don't think there's been a half a dozen of them, so it shouldn't be too difficult. I can only
Okay.
think of about 4, but there may be a few more.
Yeah. So yeah, Zach, that's the action I had for you, is the 2 years of variances.
yeah,
Sorry, Zach, I
got
threw
my-
that on you.
I've got my
That's-
homework written. I've got it. Thank you.
Okay. And then the other for the planning commission, if we agree with future land use map, get that to Zach. And that's from the comprehensive plan.
Yes, for table 4.2, and it's near page 62. I think it's page 63. But section 4.2, it says future land use plan, and then the figure 19 is the future land use map. But you look at both together and then compare that with your the current official zoning map, which is on page 59 of your comp plan. If it's
then-
online though.
Yeah, is that another 2-monther, or do you need that any quicker?
Same, it's 2 month because that's zone district, which is second installment.
Okay.
And that's why I designed those installments that way, because the first one is, again, recommendations that I think everyone will agree with, but they're more standardized that I've seen. And then when we get to the second one, that's definitely, I mean, it's still taking into account consideration, but really specific considerations are your zoning districts, the uses that you want to see in your community.
Okay. Were there any other actions that I missed?
Those are the 2 that I thought of.
Okay. Any other further comments for Nina from the commissioners?
I just like the standard AIA numbering system, and the layout works much better. Really like it.
Great, thank you. And that's going along with the user-friendly recommendations, so thank you.
And Nina, I think you've done a tremendous job here for us. Thank you very much. Very informative presentation.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I'm glad I love this stuff at Dork, and I mean, Zach knows that he took my class in this, but I love land use and zoning, so I really appreciate that. So I'm glad this comes through and try to help with, like you said, what do other communities do, and it's being specific to your community, but also it's always good to help the resources that we've seen elsewhere that might benefit this town, as unique as it is.
Well, your love of it really shows. Then thank you very much.
And I have to thank Zach for the this presentation, the visual. I gave him a Word document with just like dashes, and I said, please make this more. And I teared up when I opened it, that the way it's outlined in terms of the coloring and display. I told him that it's his obviously his expertise and assistance goes far beyond that, but that really helped. So I just want to make sure I didn't thank him enough today.
And Zach, thank you very much as well.
Thank you, Jack. Zach,
This,
yes,
this stuff really helps us.
yes.
Okay. If there's nothing else, we will move on to item number 7. Is Angie on?
She is not, so I think I'll go ahead and present her
Okay.
staff report. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, just
Yes.
making sure. So I'll go ahead and bring that up if that's all right. Alrighty, can everyone see that?
Yep, we got it.
Awesome. So this is a memo from the town manager with Julia leaving us. She wanted to express her thanks to Julia for her hard work and professionalism over the last couple of years. I think her internet's down, so she's actually not with us anymore, but I also wanted to thank her for just answering all of my questions the last few months as I've joined this project. So thank you to her. So with the upcoming changes, and limited resources, staff is requesting the consideration of changing the Planning Commission's meeting time to 3 p.m. from the current time. We did a little bit of research and we actually could not find a ordinance or resolution actually specifically listing 6:30 as the time. So I think we're requesting just consideration and maybe a resolution. So appreciate your consideration.
Yeah, I know of at least one commission member that 3 o'clock just, I don't think it's going to work. And commissioners, I need you to speak up on that.
That makes 3 o'clock could be really hard for me.
A lot of us are volunteers and we have day jobs. And so I know it's convenient for staff to work during their working hours, but we're working all day and then we're volunteering. So that doesn't work.
It's a little difficult for applicants too. The average applicant has a job and it'd be difficult to take time off and do that. I understand the reasoning for the request, but I don't see it as feasible.
Zach, do you know, do we have are there options? Is there something, something else we could consider? Do we need to look at, I don't know if we're getting into like overtime hours for staff or whatnot, but are there any kind of other options that we might be able to consider?
Yeah, so looking at the resolution, she also had requested if that didn't work, maybe another time during operating hours, but that sounded like that might not be ideal for the commission as well. Would it be possible to maybe just move it earlier, say 6 o'clock, something like that? Would that be more agreeable? I don't want to speak for town manager, but I think that would perhaps help. So.
Yeah, and what I'll need for with this 6 o'clock start time, I'll need the commissioners to chime in on that. And keep in mind, we've got commissioner absent.
It's not ideal trying to eat and in between working all day and then trying to get to a meeting. It's difficult. Where this works.
Yeah, again, from the perspective of the applicant, I think 6:30 is about as early as people with a job and they're trying to get business done. Might be difficult to do earlier than that. I'm just not. I really want to take this from the applicant's point of view. They're who we're here to serve, and how do we serve them best?
Agreed.
Understood. And I don't want to speak for town manager. So is there a way that we could push this towards the next meeting just to give her an opportunity to maybe come up with some alternatives?
Yeah, I'd be okay if there's alternatives, because I've been racking my brain, thinking, okay, are there things that, and I think when I managed the office and for the FA in Denver, do I need to shift personnel hours? And if we do that, and we're trying to keep open hours at the town hall, are there things that say volunteers can assist with, and with trying to shift hours back for staff, but still try to keep town hall hours open? You know, anything to me is, could be open, at least for discussion.
So do we need a motion to table this till next meeting and give us a chance to kind of talk about it?
Yeah, because it has action recommended. So
Oh,
if we're done discussing, I'd entertain a motion.
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we table it for the next meeting.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we table item 7, our regular start time until our next meeting. All in favor?
All right.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so yeah, we'll table that one. And now that Julia's back on, I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you very much for the work you've done for the town. I know it's helped me significantly, you know, from 2 perspectives. One as a applicant building, and then another as a commissioner trying to assist others with trying to build. And I really appreciate the work you've given us. So thank you very much.
I'd also, I was on the commission before you came, Julia, and you made a huge difference. And your input has been so valuable in so many ways. And I just want you to know you're appreciated.
Julia, I agree, and I see it as a huge loss for the town and for this planning commission to lose you. I am extremely sorry that you're leaving, and I know we will talk to you for some time. But thank you for everything that you've done for us.
Julia, I'll add my comments to my colleagues, and thank you so much for all you've done for Green Mountain Falls and for the Planning Commission, and for me personally as a citizen. I know the great work you've done here will follow you elsewhere, and know that you always have a home here in GMF.
I appreciate everyone's words, and I apologize. We had an Xfinity outage in Manitou, and I'm sure I missed a lot of exciting business, and I appreciate everyone's kind words, and your volunteerism has made my job so much easier. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. And with that, we will proceed on to item number 8. Any housekeeping announcements from anyone?
I
Okay,
have lost, I don't think we have anything. I've lost my agenda and my notes and everything, all my screens, but I believe it's just that the next meeting is a regular meeting on June 8th. I
Right.
think that's it.
we probably ought to say we're meeting at Town Hall. I see Jane shaking her head up and down. So yeah, that meeting will be at Town Hall. Are we going to have Zoom-ish capabilities at Town Hall?
The plan is it will be hybrid.
Hybrid. Okay, cool. So yeah, next regular meeting at Town Hall, hybrid meeting. So with
Hey,
that,
Todd, can I ask a clarifying question? I hate to extend the
Yeah,
meeting,
go ahead.
but so if I come in, because sometimes I travel for work and I'm, far out of town. So if I come in by Zoom, I still count for quorum. Is that correct?
Jane is nodding.
Yeah. I'm saying
check with your town attorney.
Okay.
I know how I'd answer, but I don't answer for her.
yeah, I'm sorry, I missed the question. My internet kind of gave a
No,
hiccup.
just to clarify, the question was, if I, as a commissioner, come in by Zoom, do I count for quorum? And the response was to check with the town attorney.
Or your
That
mayor,
sounds
whatever.
That's always good advice. Easier to get out of trouble than stay out of trouble than to get out of trouble. So I'll do that.
I will tell you, I did just that when I was on school board in Kansas. And while I was on the phone with them, I was counted as present. So I don't know how it works in Colorado, but
You just need to make sure you have procedures that are equivalent now that we're getting out of that special emergency period. But you could talk to the mayor, manager, and attorney to make sure that everything's clear.
We can also refer to our bylaws, and
Exactly, that's what I said,
I'm
procedures,
sure I'm sure that the town manager will be working with the board and get some clear guidance for all the boards and commissions.
Right.
Cool. If there's no other housekeeping announcements, it's 7:58 and we will adjourn. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Nice seeing you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks.
Thanks.